Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another just wonderful show for you today on this Wednesday morning, I believe, although it feels more like a Thursday, I think. It's a Wednesday in disguise as a Thursday.
It's a wondrous Wednesday, Robby. We'll have lots to discuss. Coming up on Rising, Jack Smith is firing back at the watchdog investigation against him. His legal team saying it is without merit.
Plus, good news for Uncle Herschel. Cracker Barrel says that they're reinstating that old logo we all love so much. Oh, isn't that nice?
Oh, fantastic. And President Trump is facing pushback from some on the right over his willingness to accept 600,000 Chinese students into the US. But before we get onto all of that, Robby, what is on your radar?
Happy to tell you, Niall. Now, there was no more perfect encapsulation, in my view, of the Democratic Party's crime problem than Morning Joe Scarborough's bruising interview with Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. Now, Morning Joe is of late a more moderate voice, I guess, among liberal commentators, and is using his platform to push the Democratic Party to move ever so slightly, a little bit, closer to the average voter's views on some issues like crime and policing. Many polls show broad public support for President Donald Trump's efforts to reduce crime, which have included deploying federal troops to Washington, D.C. Now, we should remain vigilant about increasing federalization of law enforcement because we don't want to live in a police state, and while also recognizing the inarguable successes associated with such an approach. Namely, D.C. finally had a murder-free week last week, thanks in part to the presence of the National Guard. Trump thinks that what worked in D.C. could work elsewhere and has suggested that other big cities beset with crime problems could benefit from an influx of federal troops and/or resources. Chicago is one of those cities, but its far-left mayor, Brandon Johnson, is opposed to Trump's plan. And when pressed by Morning Joe on whether the city should accept federal help, here's what Johnson said.
You believe that the streets of Chicago would be safer if there were more uniformed police officers on the streets of Chicago?
I believe the city of Chicago and cities across America would be safer if we actually had, affordable housing. Look,
okay,
I'm not saying that
that's not the question I asked. My question is, and I just need a yes or a no, do you believe the streets of Chicago would be safer?
Johnson simply refused to directly answer the question and mentioned that he thought other things are more important than law enforcement. And so Morning Joe asked again.
If that's complemented by having 5,000 more cops on the streets of Chicago.
I don't believe that we should narrow it down to just police officers, Joe, is what I'm saying. That is an antiquated approach. I'm saying we've invested in detectives.
Mr. Mayor, are you hearing what I'm saying? I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, that's number two. Now, after the second non-answer, Scarborough asked a third time.
If you get all of those other social programs that 800 million that New York City does, Los Angeles, other people do with great success, would an additional 5,000 cops on the streets in Chicago help complement those programs to make Chicago safer?
Look, we are working hard to make sure that our police department is fully supported. I don't believe that just simply putting out an arbitrary number around police officers is the answer.
It wasn't an arbitrary number, it was a specific number. But the man either does not believe or will not admit that more police on the streets would deter crime, even though we know it would. Look, this aspect of crime isn't complicated. If you have more police, you will get less crime. Except for the most far-left scholars of criminology, experts, even those who support criminal justice reform, as I do, agree that when you have more members of law enforcement patrolling the streets, busting the bad guys, and clearing cases, well, yes, you get less social disorder, not as many incidents of crime. The question is not really whether more police would help, it's whether national police are a long-term solution, whether other trade-offs are worth considering, like whether civil liberties are being undermined, and frankly, whether there's enough money to pull it off. Chicago, for example, is facing significant budget constraints. Reason Magazine's Christian Britschke notes that Johnson had to break a pledge not to raise taxes. In fact, he's had to increase taxes on everything, from digital streaming services to grocery bags to ride-sharing trips. He also tried to pass a $300 million property tax, but the city council killed it. My point is that Chicago might want to think about whether it's really going to say no to federal help. Getting our cities under control is, after all, very expensive work. And I thought the mayor really struggled in that interview. You can say that, look, I don't think, national police is a long-term solution to whatever problems we're facing, but you're not admitting that gravity exists and the sky is blue if you're not willing to say that more police would do something for crime.
So we disagree on this one in a few ways. One is in relation to Chicago. I think Brandon Johnson understandably has to be cognizant of the history in that city. Police officers in the street did not do much for Laquan McDonald when one of them murdered him in 2014. I was also looking, and this may appeal more to your libertarian values, between 2019 and 2023, the taxpayers of Chicago had to pay $384.2 million to settle complaints against the police for violating residents' rights. That came in turn slightly after the Department of Justice had to impose a so-called consent decree, which, as you know, happens when police departments are perceived to be in particularly egregious violation of people's rights. Now, as for the broader picture of police in the street, it doesn't seem to me as clear-cut as it seems to you. There was one study done, University of South Florida professor, drew together reports over decades about this issue of the correlation between more police on the street and reductions in crime. She took 62 studies, 32 agreed with you, and 30 said there was no real obvious correlation. And so the argument is it about the number of police or about policing strategies? So, I don't really agree with your argument here. And in relation to the DC point, I would say that the opinion poll done by the Washington Post of DC residents came out with people massively opposed, 17% to 79% opposed to what Trump was doing.
Of people in DC.
Of people in DC.
Sure. I was talking about nationally where America is on crime. Well, you're getting to something. I think the trade-offs on civil liberties are worth considering, and sure, you can call it more effective policing, but I haven't looked at specifically the study you're referencing, and but my understanding is even progressives who want different policing strategies admit that. Right. If we had cameras everywhere, if we had a surveillance state, if we had police all over the metro, yeah, there would be less crime. Now, we can't necessarily do that. We can't necessarily afford to do that. Right. And we wouldn't want to because it might be too disruptive. But whether it would deter crime itself is, I think, not as much of an open question, but maybe you can find some studies that suggest otherwise.
Well, no, you're talking about an all-out. In an all-out police state, would there be less crime? Yeah. Yes, there would. And we would consider the trade-offs to be bad in that respect,
but we wouldn't pretend that water isn't wet. We wouldn't say, and this is not even going to affect crime. No, it's going to deter crime. This is the project on some level of civilization, is deciding how much order you want and how much liberty you are willing to lose to get it.
Right.
And some of us want it here, and some of us want it here, and some of us want it here on this issue, but here on this issue. That's what it takes. But I would still say, I know Chicago is, I'm not exactly sure where it is on the ranking of crime cities right now. I bet it has more crime than its residents want to like. And while I'm civil liberties inclined and also am appalled by what happened to Laquan McDonald or what other examples are, that doesn't mean we still need to have policing services met some way or the other.
Yes, but I don't think...
The left just says, okay, then we'll have no policing. Well, then you're going to have greater disorder and greater death.
Yes, but Brandon Johnson, he's not an anarchist. He's not arguing that there should be zero police. Scarborough was concentrating on the provision of, what was the number he said, at 5,000 extra police. And Johnson was saying, well, it's actually more complicated than that because there are social corollaries or correlations to criminal behavior. And if you just concentrate on policing, then you neglect those other factors, which seems to me a completely valid argument to make.
Yeah, I guess it's about what you emphasize, and I think the right would say that emphasizing the other things and spending vigorously on all those other programs, I would love that if that worked instead of having to have more police. I just don't know that they've pulled it off in any of these major cities.
We shall see. Jack Smith responding to the investigation against him for the first time. What the former special counsel has to say about allegations of him violating the Hatch Act. After a quick break, we will be right back.